My name's David Coleman. I'm a volunteer here at the RAF Museum at Cosford, and I take tours around the museum. My interest in aircraft is that I was in the Royal Air Force for 12 years, 1957 to 69, as a pilot. After a tour on photographic cameras in Cyprus, I then got posted back to England and joined the V-Force as a co-pilot on Victor 1s. Part of the V-Force training as a pilot, you started off as a co-pilot, and during that time, towards the end of a 2-year period, if you were lucky, you got a left-hand seat conversion. Now the captain of the aircraft sits in the left-hand seat and the co-pilot in the right. When joining a squadron, a crew would start off by training, learning the local familiarisation around the airfield, and then it would start doing proper training sorties where a navigator plotter would practice going round a navigation stage. We would then go off to a bombing range where the plotter would practice dropping his bombs, and then perhaps off to Stornoway where the AEO could practice his electronic countermeasures. At the end of the sortie, we would go back to base and do 3 or 4 circuits and landings to give the captain and the co-pilot practice at landing the aircraft. After a certain amount of time, you became proficient. You could then stand QRA. QRA is Quick Reaction Alert. Every squadron in the V-Force had one aircraft on Quick Reaction Alert, fully loaded and fully fueled, ready to go. The crew that was assigned to it would spend 48 or 72 hours on QRA on 15 minutes readiness. 3 or 4, sometimes even 5 times a week, Bomber Command would call an exercise when the crew on QRA were brought from 15 to 5 minutes readiness. This meant going out to the aircraft and getting in the aircraft strapped in, ready to go. It may then be that the readiness was brought up to 2 minutes. This meant starting the engines. And you sit there with your engine started, and very occasionally you were told to taxi. And you then taxied the aircraft out to the end of the runway, ready to take off. Fortunately, these exercises were exercises, and we were then told to go back to dispersal. The Mark I was designed as a nuclear bomber. From then it was developed into the Mark 1A, which had extra electronic countermeasures fitted to it so that it could upset the enemy's radar. The next development was the Mark II, which we have here. Again, it was a bomber aircraft, but it was designed to take the Blue Steel, a cruise missile which could be delivered from high level, about 150 miles from the target. This was the plan, and this is how we trained as aircrew, to go at high level to drop the weapon. But round about that time, Gary Powers, an American pilot, was shot down in his U-2, and it was realized that the Russians had weapons that could shoot the V-Force down. And so we flew in at low level until just short of the target. We would rise to a certain height to be able to drop the weapon. The Blue Steel was known as a standoff weapon in that at high level the aircraft delivering was something like 150 miles from target. However, when we went down to low level, this distance was reduced drastically to about 25 miles, which made life a lot more dangerous for the crew because they were getting closer to their target, which was very heavily defended by the SAM missiles. We're sometimes asked how we would have felt if we had actually been told to take off whilst we were on QRA with a fully loaded aircraft. The system allowed us to be able to take off, but we were never actually cleared to continue the sortie until we were well out over the North Sea, when the final decision would have been given. We were all very highly trained, and we had learned so much how to operate our aircraft, and we were probably all fully aware that the chances of coming back to England and landing safely at our own airfield were very, very remote. And so nearly every crew had an idea, if it got as far as its target and dropped its weapon, had an idea of where they would go. In my case, I thought I would go south, because it's a lot warmer than going north. In 1968, the Navy were developing 4 nuclear submarines in order to take the Polaris missile. And at the end of 1968, 3 of these were serviceable, and they then took over the role of nuclear deterrent from the V-Force. So the Victors were taken out of service and converted into in-flight refueling tankers. These tankers then became tankers for the whole of the RAF and were refueling all sorts of different airplanes, and it was because of them that the Vulcan was able to get down to the Falklands and bomb the airfield at Port Stanley. A total of 16 Victors were used on the Black Buck raids to get the aircraft down to the Falklands, and more importantly, or just as importantly, to bring them back to Wide Awake Airfield. So the Victor started off doing one job and finished up doing 3 or 4 different jobs. If you've enjoyed my little introduction to the Victor and flying the Victor and want to see one, please come to the RAF Museum at Cosford, where not only can you see a Victor, but you can see the other 2 V-bombers, the Vulcan and the Valiant, the only place in the world where all 3 can be seen together.